Major histocompatibility complexes, also known as MHC, are divided into two different classes. Class 1, which divides into HLA or human leukocyte antigen type A, type B, and type C. And then we have class 2, which divides into HLA class DR, DQ, and DP. So these surface receptors will help the immune system recognize self from foreign antigens. So I would like you to know that class 1 is associated with the beta-2 microglobulin, while class 2 is associated with the invariant chain that will block the peptide binding group. So the self-antigen would not be able to bind the class 2 MHC receptor. So first I would like to start with MHC class 1, where its function is to eliminate the infected or abnormal cells. So what happens in normal cells is that MHC1 cells will present cytoplasmic peptides that have been degraded by proteasomes and then bring them to the cell surface. Once CD8 T cells, these are cytotoxic T cells, find these self-antigens, they won't attack the cells, and so they would survive. However, if some of these cells are infected by viruses, or they are cancer cells, what happens is that once these endogenously processed peptides are being processed inside the cells, some of these antigens that are from either cancer or the viruses will also be brought to the surface. And thus at this time, the cytotoxic T cells will recognize the infected cells or the cancer cells and destroy them. And the final point about the class 1 antigen is that it's being expressed on all nucleated cells as well as platelets. As for the class 2 receptors, these are being expressed on the antigen presenting cells, or also known as APC, which include the macrophages, B cells, as well as the dendritic cells. So what happens in these cells is that the exogenous protein is being brought to the endosomes, and in the endosomes, since the pH is too low, the invariant chain, which is shown here, will be removed. And thus, once the invariant chain is removed, the foreign protein will find a chance to bind the peptide binding groove, and when it binds and the MHC2 goes to the cell surface receptors, these antigen-presenting cells will find a chance to present the foreign antigen to the CD4 positive helper T cells. So just to reiterate what I just said, class 1 will present its antigen to CD8 positive cytotoxic T cells, while class 2 will present its antigen to the CD4 helper T cells, and it's being done by the macrophages, B cells, or dendritic cells. Now let's go through this table and reiterate what I just explained here. So function of MHC class 1 is to eliminate the infected or abnormal cells. So infected cells are like viruses, and abnormal cells are like cancer cells. It's being expressed on all nucleated cells as well as platelets, and it's being recognized by CD8 positive T cells. And the mnemonic that you can use, that you can always remember, class 1 is associated with CD8 positive, is that 1 times 8 equals 8. Versus the other one, class 2, which is associated with CD4, is that 2 times 4 is equal 8. Now back to the table, peptides that are being processed for MHC class 1 are being endogenously synthesized. And there is no invariant chain, but there is a beta microglobulin that is associated with MHC class 1. So here you can see that we have a beta microglobulin associated with MHC class 1. MHC class 2, on the other hand, is required for the presentation of the foreign antigen to the helper T cells, which are also known as CD4 positive helper T cells. And this is being done by the antigen presenting cells such as B cells, macrophages, and the dendritic cells. The antigens are being exogenously processed, and there is an invariant chain that is present and is being removed in the endosomes where the pH is low. Now, I would like you to know that the interaction of the T cell receptors and the peptides that are presented by the human leukocyte antigen are determining the autoimmune reaction in certain individuals. And so I would like you to memorize the association of the HLA, different HLA subtypes, with the autoimmune disorders that are listed here. So you can use the mnemonic that I've provided here. So for DR2, the mnemonic is call doctor to say, hey, Miss SLE is good. So DR2 goes for DR2 right here. Hay goes for hay fever. MS goes for multiple sclerosis, SLE for lupus, and good for Goodpasture's disease. The next condition is diabetes mellitus type 2, and DR3 and DR4 associated with that. So how you can see that you can write diabetes with number 4 and number 3 embedded in it. For DR4 alone, I'm thinking of we have 4 limbs. So rheumatoid arthritis, where there is arthralgia in all 4 limbs, is associated with DR4. As for DR5, you can think of pentad. So 5 goes for pentad for pernicious anemia. And then Hashimoto, the S could be another 5 that is embedded. So everything is linked to DR5. As for DQ, whether it could be DQ2 or DQ8, it's associated with the celiac disease. So celiac, assume there's a Q in the end, goes for DQ, HLA subtype. A3 is associated with hemochromatosis, where there is a buildup of iron, so you can think of AAA iron batteries for A3 subtype. And then finally we have the B27, which is very important, and the mnemonic you can use is PAIR for psoriasis, ankylosing spondylosis, inflammatory bowel disease, and Reiter. So PAIR goes for B27. And that concludes our discussion.